Hello and welcome to episode 124 of the Reds Unrestricted podcast. I'm your host, David Comerford, and I'm joined by Chris Coughlin to discuss Liverpool's 4-1 defeat at Manchester City. So this was a game that actually started pretty well for Liverpool with Mohamed Salah giving them the lead in the 17th minute, but 10 minutes later, Julian Alvarez stepping into the team for Erling Haaland got the equaliser for Man City, and then really seconds after the restart for the second half, Kevin de Bruyne gives Man City the lead. By the 53rd minute, it's 3-1. And then with 15 minutes to go, Jack Grealish gets Man City's fourth and really makes the scoreline pretty brutal indeed. So I'm joined by Chris, and we're going to start with our three-word match reviews. And Chris, I'd also like to ask you whether you think that is one of the poorest displays and not only this season, but I suppose across the last few years, across the Klopp tenure, across I suppose recent Liverpool history. I mean, it's got to be up there in terms of how bad that was.
Brutal was the word for it, really. I said after the game on Twitter, the second half was as brutal as it got. My three words that I've gone for is chasm of quality, because I just think by full time, you really did see where both sides are at right now. I heard Dan on the Redmen TV saying, the first half Liverpool were fully involved, and to an extent they were. I think the goal somewhat came against the run of play from Salah, but we all knew Liverpool were going to be playing on the counter-attack at the Etihad, and they did so to maximum effect early on. Could have been 2-0, of course, and maybe that was a turning point, perhaps. And then when Alvarez equalised, it was something City had been threatening. It was absolutely something City had been threatening, but you still sensed Liverpool had a part to play in the game. And just to echo what Dan said, really, that from the second Kevin de Bruyne tapped it in, I never had a sense Liverpool were going to get back into the game. Bystanders is probably the word for the rest of the second half. I think in terms of reacting to in terms of the poorest display, I think for me, less poor, more frustrating in that there were no punches thrown in that second half for me. And we've seen it a lot this season. When Liverpool go behind, they struggle to find a way to get back into the game, which when they took the lead, they've got a very good record of going ahead this season. So you kind of hope that would maybe even itself out. But there were no punches thrown. It was really, really tough, difficult to watch that second half. But the people we are, the support that we show, it's one of them that you have kind of got to just stomach it and just fight the urge to turn the TV off, really. The whole through thick and thin and everything. And it was a horrible second half, because especially when you hear the chanting of the ole, 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 and it just emphasised the difference in quality, as I said, the chasm in quality. And yes, it was a very, very tough evening. And I saw a tweet yesterday as well. I saw a tweet on Friday, rather, because that was still March, saying that the United 7-0 was in the same month, which, to say the United 7-0 was just a matter of weeks ago, if it feels like it was a season or two back.
Well, let me clarify what I mean when I talk about the poorest games. I mean, this is Man City away. This is arguably the toughest fixture in the entire division when you consider the form that City have been in recently. But it was the manner in which Liverpool threw the towel in the second half, and that's why my three-word match review is simply we gave up, because we did. And I don't know if it was after that De Bruyne goal, I don't know if it was after the Gundogan goal, but we did. And it was a reminder for me of when Arsenal used to go to the Etihad, when Chelsea, I think it happened to them a couple of times, they went there and they just got absolutely battered. They conceded about 5 goals. And it's just a complete and utter mismatch. You look at these teams of been producing these kind of epic battles and been really closely matched for years. But the gulf that has emerged within a short space of time is incredible. And Liverpool became kind of the plaything of City. And you mentioned there about the edge to turn the TV off. Obviously, like you say, we're never going to do that. But never have I sort of wanted a game to end more. Really, even at 3-1, it was weird. Technically, you still have a chance of coming back, but and you just kind of still have the desire for the game to finish. That was the nature of it. That was the control City exerted, the pace the game was being played at. Even when the substitutes came on, there didn't seem to be any desire from them. The lack of kind of fight was permeating the squad, and City can make you look like that with their ability to manage a game, but the whole afternoon, really, it just felt. I mean, especially obviously second half, but it just felt as if there was kind of no belief there at all that they could do something. And we've seen in previous years, we've gone to the Etihad and looked nervous, looked jittery. That I'd much rather nerves than what we saw yesterday, because that was really tantamount to throwing the towel in. And I kind of know how those fan bases used to get humbled by City year on year fail now.
Well, the kind of way to sum it up as well, a year ago, Liverpool and City played out a Premier League classic at the Etihad, and Liverpool went toe-to-toe with City and came away with the 2-2 draw. It wasn't enough in the end to claim to claim the title. But in the space of a year, you've just seen the way the two sides have gone. And I know Liverpool, of course, beating City 1-0 at Anfield, but this so far into the season, because back then, look, anything could have happened, but obviously it just didn't materialise in terms of a significant run. But yesterday, it felt deeper than just a defeat in many aspects, and you never, ever, ever see Jurgen Klopp mentioning his players, or very rarely at the end. But there were two particular quotes that stuck out for me. The first of which was when he tongue-in-cheek thanked Manchester City for only scoring 4 goals. Because he pretty much said if they were greedy, are we talking 6, 7, 8 if they wanted it? And then for him to say that there were players that he didn't know where they were at, in terms of whether that was mentally, whether that was physically, or whatever, that felt like boiling over of frustration that's been felt. I mean, he came into the game, didn't he, saying about how he needed the break, really, in terms of just recharging before it. But for him to come out and say that, when he is normally so level-headed, especially when it comes to his own squad, I just thought that was a bit significant, really.
Yeah, I think there was a quote about how there was 4 players he thought played well in the game. So obviously pretty damning for the other 7 in the substitutes. But we'll come on to Klopp later, because I really do want to get into that, and you make some good points there. But this is really almost the definition of a game of two halves, this one. The contrast, I think, was stark, even if I don't think Liverpool were amazing first half. I mean, you mentioned the kind of counter-attack element. I didn't really see it as counter. It felt a bit like that, but to me it was sort of like City were pushing up so aggressively when we were trying to play out from the back, that they were leaving a lot of space in behind. And if we kind of beat that press, then we were able to kind of get the ball into space in behind. And obviously you had Salah was often the one running onto it. Which I think was a fairly good attacking game plan. I think there were too many times when we couldn't play out from the back, and maybe we missed Thiago in that regard. So I'm really there thinking at half time, let's eliminate the bad, which is the amount of times where we're kind of giving the ball up in our own final third, where we're having to hoof it downfield. Let's try and retain possession a bit better, playing out from the back, and then we can kind of really exploit the kind of space that they're leaving us. And that's why I was hopeful for the second half, if we could kind of make those tweaks and iron those issues out. But yeah, obviously then a disastrous start to it. But so if we just talk about that first half, I mean, I think generally the feeling was, obviously City, I'd say, were fairly dominant, but I think generally the feeling was pretty decent at half time.
Yeah, it was competitive. It was a little bit uneasy to watch in terms of the playing out from the back, just because playing out from the back against most of the teams is very different to playing out from the back against Manchester City. I've said it for years that the way Manchester City press, I feel, is unique because as you move the ball forward, they stand still in that you have to play around them. It's really it's a difficult one to kind of describe, but they don't move back at times because they know that they're that good when they press up that they'll flummox teams into thinking how do we get round City, and then by the time it gets to the significant part of the midfield, they will push up and win the ball back. And of course, it's interesting watching playing out from the back in that when a goal gets scored, for example, you wonder how many passes took part in the play and that. And Salah's goal was a good goal, playing out from the back, ball over the top, well-timed run, and ultimately a brilliant finish. And he's shown time and time again that he can do that in the big games. The more you think about it, potentially that it was a turning point when Jack Grealish tracked back, and I'm sure we'll mention his second half display. But overall, a bit like that what Darren Fletcher said, I can't claim to have seen every City game in the world ever, but it struck me as probably his best game for them since he arrived from Aston Villa. And then what frustrated me, and I don't know the word positives from the first half, the wings were, from the outset, Mahrez and Grealish were tormentors in chief. They were superb on the flanks. And we probably risk sounding like a bit of a broken record if we're to mention one or two individuals that we've mentioned on previous podcasts, but just a brief mention about Trent Alexander-Arnold, because I don't want to go into that too much. But I've kind of thought his main issue against wingers was wingers with pace, given that he's not the quickest fullback in the world. But again, his attacking outlet is what Liverpool you want to utilise him for. Jack Grealish is not particularly fast. He's quick, but he's not like Vinicius fast, for example. He's just technically good. And I thought he had Trent on strings yesterday, to be honest. And it was extremely concerning because the amount of times that didn't result in goals, where you question the positional awareness of him maybe not even knowing where Jack Grealish was quite a concern. And that's also where the first goal ultimately kind of came from, wasn't it? Not knowing who's behind him on the wings, letting the ball go through his legs as well, I know, while trying to make the block, and Alvarez scoring. And by the way, I think before the game, when we see Haaland not in, you've got to acknowledge that Manchester City have a World Cup winning striker as a backup as well. So that's hardly a bad replacement. But yeah, ultimately, it was a strange watch the first half, but Liverpool had opportunities that they didn't make the most of, and you went into halftime thinking, right, more of the same, and there could be something to come from this.
And I completely agree on Alvarez. I mean, he scored, that was his 13th goal yesterday, and I think Nunez has got 14. So, you are right, and it's certainly something before the game that I was like, you could even have argued that the absence of Foden was bigger in a weird way, given that how he tends to play against Liverpool and how good, like you say, Alvarez has been, and definitely played very well yesterday. Looks like the perfect backup option for them. But the second half, I mean, we talked a bit about the attitude already. Probably maybe a bit more to say on that, but also the defending. I mean, how many of those goals were from cutbacks into the box or sort of low crosses? I don't know if it was 3 or all 4 of them, but yeah, it was just a horror show.
I saw a stat as well saying how good Van Dijk was in the first half, because I do think he was good in the first half, but in the second half, I don't think there's anybody from a defensive aspect that can take any credit apart from, I think Alisson tends to be coming out from most games with the main bit of credit for Liverpool at the moment. And again, you could argue if you're being overly critical, could you have got to the Mahrez cross? Possibly, because I do think he had the opportunity to get there before De Bruyne. But again, what Alvarez does, I think that Haaland doesn't do a little bit in terms of his involvement for the game, involvement in the play. I'm not sure Haaland could play the pass that Alvarez did to Mahrez.
Yeah.
And that it was a brilliant ball. And Riyad Mahrez as well. It's a strange one in that whenever a player gets into incredible form, Pep and his rotation policy just seem to think, right, I'll make sure you don't get too ahead of yourself and I'll bench you for a few weeks, because Mahrez was absolutely incredible a couple of months ago and then found himself on the bench for Foden, who hadn't seen the light of day since he scored a hat-trick against Manchester United. But Mahrez is a world-class talent and put it on the plate for De Bruyne. And then you mentioned the cutbacks. I think City are one of the best in the world for that, in terms of getting to the byline, cutting it back. I mean, the cutback for Grealish's goal. I've watched it again. Bruyne looks into the box, but he knows in his head he doesn't need to look for Grealish, because he just play into the path because he knows Grealish is going to make the run. And again, you look, and I'm just taking this goal in isolation because I'm sure that that there were many aspects from several different players. But Grealish plays the pass to De Bruyne. It returns to Grealish. The difference, if you look at, because Grealish has to run past Alexander-Arnold to get to the finish, where Trent then is when Grealish finishes it, I think that was just a sign of just how the legs had gone in terms of the defensive determination. All round. I'm saying that now. And it was just incredibly frustrating. And the way say even the third fell to Gundogan. Good teams will ill fall to you in times like that when you're in good form, and maybe it won't fall the same way for Liverpool. But I know I mentioned the counter-attacking in the first half, but that was completely out the window, really, in the second. And it was kind of my hope when Nunez came on, in particular, that he could get involved in that aspect, but hardly had a kick, with all due respect to the guy.
Yeah, and we had 4 shots in the entire game. So, I mean, that's got to be...
Still more than Leicester.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's a bit of certainly a low point against Man City. But because I mean, you're looking at that 4 shots as what sort of seeing mid-table teams would be able to muster that even at the Etihad, I think. To be fair, we're closing in on mid-table, but so I mean, the second half, I mean, defending wise, like, there are loads of individual moments you can pick out. I think the main problems are, and I think Klopp said it, just passive, really. It's sort of reacting to what City do rather than anticipating it. And you're up against a team that is so surgical and so precise, like you say, has all these really sort of devastating rehearsed patterns that they employ better than anybody else. Probably they do that. And it looked like we weren't aware of what they were, whether they'd not been spotted, whether they'd not just been implemented. I probably think it's the latter out of those two. And every time I watch us against City, I just feel this kind of frustration, because every other team, they try and play ambitious passes and they don't come off. And there's there's a few passes that go astray during the course of a game and you can use it. And this Man City team, they never ever seem to misplace a pass, and I think we probably underestimate how exhausting that makes to play them. And obviously the Alvarez ball, I mean, like you say, is probably a prime example of that. I think so. Just the passivity and the inability to track runners, really. With the kind of things that stood out. And I think there's a lot of times where you see us you see situations where the City player has kind of no right to get through, no right to be able to pick the pass or get the shot off, given the presence that we have, but they just do, and that's when we do manage to track them. So I think it was just sort of comprehensively weak across the board. And another thing I want to say, second half wise, is this team has been so sloppy this season, like unbelievably. Like, the lack of technical ability, basic technical ability at times, has been infuriating. And I think in terms of being a consistent team, maybe a little bit overlooked. And I don't know if it's because of the lack of the midfield reinforcements. You're playing players who don't necessarily have that in their locker in midfield. But I think the moment that sums it up, that game, is I think there's a poor clearance from City. It falls right to Fabinho, and he has quite a simple header, which I think he tries to aim at Alexander-Arnold. And I think this might be for the second goal. And then we just give it back to them, and within a few seconds, it's in the net. And you're just like, if you're going to make basic mistakes in games, I think obviously you're handing the ball back to the opposition, you're making your task harder, but I also think you're increasing the kind of frustration levels, and sort of sloppiness can be kind of self-perpetuating in a way, I think, because
Yeah.
you sort of end up sort of dragging yourself into the habit of it, and losing a bit of your composure. And yeah, our games have just been really messy to watch at times. I think we saw a sequence. I think when we had the Bournemouth podcast, talked about a sequence on there as well. So that's just been bizarre that's deserted us. And yeah, I think I don't know whether it's a lack of midfield protection. I mean, at this stage, even when it is getting kind of into that final third and you bypass that midfield, it's like the individuals in the back four aren't defending well enough either. I mean, it's totally across the board. I think the weaknesses, and it's sort of a game that makes you think, how much can Luis Diaz solve the problems? Because you put him into that
Well,
match
yeah.
yesterday. I don't think anything changes. I mean, on the subject of that, in terms of what might have changed, one thing we should mention is obviously the red. I mean, Rodri should have been sent off.
Yeah.
But
I was, yeah.
but how damning is it that you've got pretty much everybody agreeing that if City had gone down to 10 men, they probably still would have won the match?
Quite possibly. Because what I was going to mention, the flip side of it, I was going to mention Gakpo's first half display. Because I thought in the false nine element, I thought he did quite well. Because I thought he was good on the half turn, was able to drive. And that was just an element that got completely lost from the start of the second half in terms of getting him on that ball in that area and driving. Because, look, I said it at the time that it happened to a few friends that if he hadn't been on a yellow card, he'd have got one. Yeah. And it's a really frustrating. It'd be interesting to talk to referees, to be honest with you, and see how they react to that kind of statement. Because the whole, if he wasn't on a yellow card, he'd got one. Well, why isn't he getting one? Because he's on a yellow.
Yeah.
Ultimately, he stopped the breakaway. I don't care. You've been booked a minute beforehand. If it's a bookable offence, it's a bookable offence. And if it meant a red card, it meant a red card. But I know what you mean. I think City went down to 10 men against Fulham in the first half. In the first half of the season, and still won the game. Stoppage time with the Haaland penalty. But again, yeah, if you took, as good as Rodri is, I think if you took him out that team yesterday and didn't replace him with anyone, put them down to 10 men, I don't know how much of a difference it would have made. But there was one player in particular from City I just wanted to mention with regards to when you say about their rehearsed patterns. John Stones started at right back, and I saw this against Leipzig as well. Started at right back. The man ends up at right centre mid, left centre mid, right wing, centre forward. But that's just how City have. They've got those individuals that can just overload everywhere. And Liverpool probably once upon a time did have that. But it's now, we talk about the rebuild, but it's an element that's been lost in Liverpool this season.
You look at the tactical battles that these two managers have had down the years, and I think unfortunately with the state of this squad right now, Klopp doesn't really feel like Klopp can even go toe to toe with Guardiola. Maybe that's being too kind, but we'll come on to Klopp in a second, I suppose. But yeah, just inherently painful day, and you've got. I mean, the second half. I mean, all the jeering. I think there's chance of getting sacked in the morning. The olaying of the passes. I mean, I think it's weird. City aren't one of our biggest rivals in terms of the feeling, but given how close we've been to them down the years, it was extra sort of chastening to kind of for the match to end up the way it did. And one thing we should say as well, that I think Chloe mentioned it on Twitter, the volume and breadth of the always the victims chants in that game, really disturbing, to be fair. But and we also saw, I think there was something thrown at the Liverpool bus, wasn't there? So I think City have had to put out 2 statements after the game, condemning those. So obviously, pretty horrific that as well, you'd have to say. But anyway, we're going to move on in a second to Klopp and his role, because I think there's been some interesting discussion about that, and then we'll finish by previewing the Chelsea game. But if you are enjoying this episode, let me remind you to please give us a 5-star review on Spotify or a positive review on Apple Podcasts. It's really quick, but it makes the world of difference to us. And yeah, you can also follow the podcast and press the notification button so you get notified and it appears in your feed. But yeah, like I say, Chris, let's talk about Klopp, because I just had this thought during the game yesterday that any other manager overseeing this run of form from the team, not just obviously the last couple of games, but over the season as a whole, and not just that, overseeing the attitude of the players, overseeing, the comments that he makes after the game, like you say, is kind of end of days manager talk, weirdly. And there's obviously no prospect of that, but any other manager, really, and it's possible that that is literally true, that any single other manager in another post in a comparable situation would have been sacked by now. And I'm not saying he should be. Yeah. Let me just clarify.
No,
I'm just saying, like, that does sort of paint a pretty damning picture at the same time.
I mean, just compared to Julian Alvarez.
Exactly, yeah.
Getting sacked a point off top, and seeing your successor oversee a 4-2 De Clasico win. But I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, because I don't think you've made any wrong points there. I've just named one manager there that was sacked for what a lot of other teams would gladly take. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, you're seeing the frustration kind of boil over. A couple of years ago, when everything was going badly, and we saw Klopp a bit broken, but there was so much going on in his life, and your heart bled for him. It really did, and he did so well to recover from that. He's done ridiculous work at Liverpool Football Club, and I agree with you that there's no need to discuss the changing of the guard or anything like that. But what we are seeing is a man who I'm not sure knows the answers to the questions being posed right now. I think that's fair to say, especially with the current quota of players.
Yeah.
Because, again, with the midfield and the defending, the definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results. And I feel like there's a bit of an element at the moment, but there aren't the players, the personnel to make those changes, to freshen it up. And that is quite a concern, because it's so easy to bypass midfield, and of course Jurgen Klopp's not telling the midfield to let them be bypassed and everything like that. But it's such a concern, and I think it'll be very interesting to see him on Monday talk ahead of Chelsea, because I'm sure post match he's feeling so many raw emotions. On Monday he'll be a bit more considered, and we'll hear pre-Chelsea in terms of how he approaches that. But I'm feeling sorry for him, because he can't change anything right now, and we're now hearing him openly admit that a summer of change is needed.
Yeah.
So whether that has some sort of impact on the individuals, I'm not sure, because of course they'll know it's not good enough, and then when they hear the manager saying, "Look, we need changes," they're thinking, "Is it me? Is it me? Is it me?" So it's probably toughest spell of his Liverpool career, given that in 2021 there were so many injuries to defenders.
Yeah.
But now, barring one or two, pretty much a full hand.
And I think come the end of the season, we'll have to kind of think about how Klopp's performed really over the course of the campaign. I mean, you mentioned there about not being able to find the solutions. It's April now. It doesn't look like those are forthcoming, unfortunately. The reality is, it looks like, as much as you can mention all the volume of injuries that we've had, the highest in the league, you can mention obviously the lack of investment down the years. It still feels as if the ceiling of this team should be much higher, or even the basement of this team. It feels like it shouldn't be kind of the prospect of Europa League football, really. In spite of that, and he hasn't been able to find any sort of lasting solution. And he isn't immune from criticism for that. The thing I think we'd all say is, give him the chance to, with the transfer window in the summer, he's earned the right to have kind of those additions made, and to prove that he can take the squad back to the top. And I don't have any doubt that he can do that. But obviously he is probably under quite a lot of pressure, probably more pressure than he's been at any point, in terms of there's no immediate risk of him losing his job. But if there isn't a big improvement next season, then maybe that is a conversation that does start to be had, and that's just the reality of football. And I look at Spurs and Pochettino and stuff, and maybe he'll end up going back there at some stage. But and that makes me think, I'd rather rebuild, change the squad, not the manager, kind of thing, and try and go again, because I think you worry about the long-term repercussions of being a bit rash based on one poor season in what has largely been kind of the best era in Liverpool's modern history. So it's difficult, because any other situation, you'd look at it and think that these players have stopped playing for the manager. But it's hard to kind of think that that's the case, given the kind of what Klopp's done for so many of these players, given how they've run through brick walls for years. But equally, there is seemingly a disconnect there. So definitely a puzzling situation, with we're no closer to really to putting it together, I'd say. Top four wise, our next game is against Chelsea away. In the Premier League. We're recording this before Newcastle play Man United, so we probably need Man United to do us a favour there. I mean, not that we don't lose any ground on them, certainly, and then maybe a favour from Everton on so our two biggest rivals really in the next couple of days. And then we play Chelsea away. And I think, the thing to kind of say is, as much as we don't have much room for error, City away shouldn't be the defining factor in a top four race. The problem is, we struggled so much against the lesser teams. We've actually been doing relatively okay against the bigger teams up to that stage. And I think obviously the attitude and the performance mean that you can't really just write this one off, unfortunately, and move on. As much as normally teams in a top four race might actually do that when they're going away to Man City. But yeah, it's Chelsea next. And Chris, I'd like to know what you do with the team for this one, but also we're in a bizarre situation here where we've got Liverpool 8th in the Premier League. God, I've not looked at the table until now. 8th in the Premier League.
When you said Europa League, I was thinking, have you missed the word conference out of that?
That's true, yeah. That's obviously a prospect too. And then Chelsea 11th. Incredible at this stage of the season for those two teams to be in those positions, and Chelsea almost in that role of making Liverpool fans feel better about their own season, losing 2-0 to Aston Villa yesterday. So how do you see that kind of matchup between these two kind of teams who've had the fall from grace, and what would you do differently with the lineup?
Let's also say that at this time we're previewing a game against the Graham Potter Chelsea at the time of recording, because who knows what? Who knows what could happen before Tuesday? I know it's unlikely, but Chelsea have given such backing to Graham Potter publicly as well, haven't they? The dreaded votes of confidence.
Yeah.
But Chelsea yesterday against Aston Villa, Brighton under Potter got a reputation for XGFC, didn't they? And I think at one point yesterday, Chelsea had a 2.22 XG against Villa's 0.88.
Was it 27 shots they had in the game? Yeah, 27.
So. But McGinn's goal's ridiculous. I think they said in commentary it's just a hardly hit pass, but the way it whips into the corner is a sensational finish. And I heard apparently there's a quote from Potter after the game where he said that McGinn's goal wasn't really a big chance. Now, that to me means correct, because he's just hit it from outside the box, so you're not going to call it a big chance. But that to me strikes of a manager that really is feeling it at the moment in terms of being up against it. And we don't know how many of these January signings were his doing or his say. We don't know how many Todd Bowley just looked at and thought, right, I want you, you're coming in. And it's an intriguing season for Chelsea overall, because would they be in a better position with Tuchel in charge? I feel they probably would.
Yeah, I'd say so.
To be honest,
much better position as well, potentially. With the weakness of this top four race, Chelsea should definitely be in there.
Yeah, given that they will be 11th as well, because I think it's an 8-point gap to 12th and Palace, as things stand.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So, it's such a strange season for Chelsea. I mean, I remember they finished 10th the season after they won the title in when they finished 10th in 2015-16, the year after they won the title. But I was thinking about it yesterday, and I thought Chelsea are so bad at times here. But then I remembered what happened a couple of hours previously. And again, I kind of going back to about doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. I think I'm almost expecting Nunez to come in now. On Tuesday. And this isn't a slight at Diogo Jota. And I know we got the assist for Salah with it. A great run from deep and laid it off for Salah. But he's just looked so off it at times. And I'm a big fan of Diogo Jota. But it's now best part of a year. It's coming up to a year since his last Liverpool goal. So
if he doesn't score this week, I think it will be.
Yeah. So that, and I know he's had injuries, but that is still a concern nonetheless.
It's about 30 appearances.
For a forward who's signed a long-term contract in the summer, it's not what you expect, is it? And I'm expecting Diaz to be on the bench. I was disappointed he wasn't in the squad at all. Yesterday,
after the whole international break of about 60 different updates of Diaz back in training, and then he's not even in the squad.
Yeah, that it surprised me that when it was the first thing Klopp said in the press conference. But nevertheless, that they're the two that I hope certainly will happen. Nunez actually into the starting 11, Diaz on the bench, and because the whole point of the amount of forwards now is to think, right, you don't need to throw Luis Diaz in there and potentially risk a reoccurrence of any injury. You see, the thing is, I think the back five, including Alisson, the back five right now is Liverpool's best back five. So I don't. It's frustrating to say I wouldn't necessarily bring anyone in or take anyone out, because I don't know who I'd bring in place of. So then you look at the midfield. Fabinho now has to play, given Bajcetic's injury.
Yeah.
So that's something that's pretty immovable. Oxlade-Chamberlain is leaving in the summer. Naby Keita, of course, is injured. Brackets again. Harvey Elliott, I'll continue to back, but he didn't back Trent up enough yesterday, and that was a big concern. And he needs to nail down a position as well, because we need to know as fans what Harvey Elliott's main position is. Because I think it's right centre mid, but then you'll see performances like that, and there's not enough work coming backwards. So it sounds strange to say that after a 4-1 defeat. In my head, there's only one change I'd make. But that perhaps emphasises the lack of options.
Yeah, I was literally just about to say we don't have the fact that you don't have the scope for changes, and it's weird because I think they mentioned in the commentary yesterday how good the bench looked, but it's kind of in a bit of an illusion, really, given how many of those are actually compelling. I think obviously Nunez, but then I think Firmino, he could come in, but has he been? He's not really done anything inspiring when he's come on recently to kind of make that case. So it would almost be changes for changes' sake. But anyway, we'll leave it there, and we'll be back after that Chelsea game to see how that one plays out. Randy, you can watch these podcasts on YouTube. So if you are watching us in video form, please like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and you can subscribe to the channel as well, please. That would be much appreciated. And remember that we do have an email address, which is redsunrestrictedpodcast@gmail.com, where you can let us know your sort of thoughts on this Liverpool season, or any feedback about the podcast itself, any questions like that. We'll be more than happy to receive and answer those. So until midweek after that Chelsea game, take care and try and forget about this one.